Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
I noticed a couple in a dark corner who acted as if they were going to spend a quiet evening together, but this was not the case at all. They came in after us, sat down to watch, and did not take their eyes off us from the moment we sat down. They might as well wear signs that say private investigators at work. Who were they watching? Follow me and my secretary Katie. In fact, Kathy was more of a personal assistant than a secretary and always accompanied me when I was out of town on business. My wife's boyfriend thought there was more to Katie and was trying to find out for sure. He was trying to get information that he could give to Jean so she could divorce me and get a large sum of money. Apparently, she didn't tell him why she couldn't do it. That morning, Kathy and I flew into the Dallas airport to attend meetings with representatives of Milgard Industries and expected to be there all night. I was sure I saw a blonde couple watching us in the baggage claim area at the airport. The Jean guy would have shelled out more money if he had followed us as we left town, but what he didn't know was that he was wasting his money. If I slept with Kathy on a table in front of a press photographer and they took pictures and he gave the pictures to Jean, she would give him a beating and probably kick him to the curb. Katie and I finished dinner. I called the waiter and asked him to bring the bill. Katie stood up and headed to her room while I headed towards the bar. I drank a little and gave my observers something to include in their report. I asked a couple of ladies to dance and even sat down with one of them at a table for a drink. We talked a little, and it turned out that she was also there on business and was just killing time at the bar because there was nothing worthwhile on TV. She made it clear that she wasn't there to get laid, and that was fine with me because that wasn't what I was there for either. I danced with her 2 more times and then headed to my room. Once there, I took a small black box out of my suitcase, turned it on, and walked around the room with it. I received this device from a friend who owns a company that is actively involved in security issues. It picked up electrical and wireless signals, bugs, so to speak. My room was clean, so I went to the door leading to the next room and knocked 3 times. I didn't worry about private investigators. Kathy was registered in room 212, and I was in room 516. The adjoining room, 518, was in the name of Frank Bowers, and Mr. Bowers did not exist. The fact that I lingered in the hotel lobby did not leave me indifferent and allowed Katie to go up to her room, wait 15 minutes, and then go to room 518. If anyone had followed her, they would have seen her enter her room alone, and we expected that once she was in her room, they would not waste any more time on her since I still had the team with me. Katie also had one of Alan's little black boxes and checked her room in room 518 before I went up to mine. Why did we jump through all these hoops? I knew for sure that the private detectives were not hired by my wife. And although I assumed that their employer was Jean's boyfriend, I wasn't sure. It could have been a little industrial espionage on the part of one of my competitors. Either way, I figured it was better to be safe than sorry. Why was I so sure that it wasn't my wife who was behind the private detectives? I think that's the whole story. It started like many other sad stories, by accident. I finished breakfast, kissed Jean goodbye, and headed to work. Jean called after me and said, "Don't forget that we're having dinner with Pat and Andy tonight, so try to get home early." I agreed with my mother that I would pick up the children this evening. Upon entering the garage, I pressed the button to activate the garage door opener, and the door opened. I got into my car, backed out of the garage, and headed down the driveway. As I was backing out onto the street, I reached over and pressed the button on the garage door remote, but the door wouldn't close. I pressed the button a couple more times, but the door still wouldn't close. So, I pulled over to the curb, got out, and went back into the house. I had a few 9V batteries in my basement, and I knew from experience that when the remote control didn't work, it was usually because the battery was dead. I walked through the garage to the door to the house, and when I opened it, I heard Jean laugh and say, "The big idiot is gone." Do you have time to drop by for a minute before you have to go to work? Is dinner still open today? Fine, I love sitting with you, Frank and Pat. knowing that we just cuckolded them again. "Okay, darling, see you in 15 minutes. Then I heard a click as the phone was put back on the lever. My first instinct was to rush to Jean and tell her everything I had just heard, but a little voice in my head said, "Hold on, guy. Better find out everything you can before you get into her." I quietly closed the door, got into the car, and drove to work. I didn't have to park at the end of the block to see who would arrive in 15 minutes. From what I heard, it was Andy. Andy was the husband of Jean's best friend, Pat. I thought about the situation all the way to work, and the big idiot came up with a plan of action. The first thing I needed to do was gather more information, and I knew how to get it. As soon as I got to the office, I called Alan Audit at Audit Security. Alan and I grew up together, and he was the closest person I could ever call a best friend. My father gave Alan the money to start his company when Alan was discharged from the Army. In the Army, Alan was assigned to the ASA, and he learned a lot that he thought would be useful to him in civilian life. He shared his ideas with me, and I persuaded my father to help him. When I got through to Alan, I told him what I had just learned and what I wanted to do. He said, "No problem. Get her out of the house and don't let her in for 2 hours. We're having dinner with Pat and Andy tonight. We'll probably go to Duke's Steakhouse, and it'll be at least 3 hours before we get home. I'll drop by for the key. Frank, sorry, dude. I always thought you and Jean were great for each other." "I thought so too, Alan. I thought so too. My problem is keeping myself from throwing myself across the table at Andy and grabbing him by the throat." "There will be plenty of time for that, buddy. Just act calm and earn yourself an Oscar tonight." Yes, I thought, much easier said than done. I took a pen and notepad and sketched out a plan of action. I needed to get more information first, and I just took care of that by calling Alan. The next step was to protect assets, including my loan. At some point, I would have to do something with the credit cards that held mine and Jean's assets. I would have to set up another safe deposit box in my name only and move some things, for example, certificates of deposit, from the safe deposit box that Jean and I had access to. I wouldn't touch the checking account, but I would close the savings account and transfer the money. We would end up dividing most of our personal assets equally, but my largest asset would be out of reach. When we got married, Jean had to sign a strict prenuptial agreement that prevented her from ever getting a piece of the family company. My great-grandfather founded the company and passed it on to my grandfather, who in turn passed it on to my father. It was privately owned and eventually came to me. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father wanted the company to always remain in the hands of the family, which is why Jean had to sign a prenuptial agreement. The third item consisted of one word, revenge. I didn't indicate anything in this section. I had time to think about it, but it would have been cruel. I promised myself this, it will really be cruel. I was putting away my list when Katie came in and reminded me that I had a lunch appointment with John Crossfire of Crossfire Manufacturing. "Do you want me to go with you?" "I think yes. Take good notes. Crossfire can turn out to be good for us." I was completely faithful to Jean, but I like to look at beautiful women, so I hired many of them. When Katie showed up for an interview, she was hired as soon as she walked through the door. I didn't care if she could type or even spell. Luckily, Katie was a master at everything and quickly became my right hand. Having worked for me for 2 years, I had no doubt that Kathy could take my place and do my job if the need arose. I smiled to myself, thinking that she could easily take Jean's place and perform her duties. Katie was the only girl who could have tempted me to cheat on Jean, but fortunately, common sense prevailed, at least until now. I quickly shook the thought out of my head. Just because Jean was cheating didn't mean I had to behave the same way. I managed to make it through the day and left work half an hour early, as Jean had asked. When I returned home, I was greeted with a kiss, and Jean was already dressed and ready to go. I thought about the award-winning play I was about to perform at dinner that night, and it got me thinking about the show Jean was putting on. She played the role of a loving wife flawlessly. I had no idea that she thought I was a big jerk, and it certainly didn't show in the bedroom. Our personal life was great. I saw absolutely no loss of love or affection, and this gave me another thought. How many times had I been with her since Andy? How many times had she given me a few seconds? Would I be able to sleep with him with her knowing what I now know? I would have to do this if I didn't want her to start thinking that I might know something. I needed to keep everything looking normal until I got the information I needed. Dinner went the same way as dozens of other times the four of us had gotten together, except this time, the big idiot was aware of what Andy and Jean were up to. This knowledge changed the situation a little. Now, I was looking for the subtle signs that I knew had to be there. As always, Jean sat next to me in the booth with Pat and Andy on the other side. Andy was opposite Jean. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jean's leg twitch slightly, and at the same time, a slight grin flashed across Andy's face. This was something I never would have noticed until I overheard that phone conversation. After dinner, we went to the Black Hole for drinks and dancing. Andy was dancing with Jean, and they were being discreet, probably because Pat and I were there. I danced with Pat, and as I hugged her, I wondered if she suspected Andy was cheating on her. If she had any idea, I'd bet she would never even remotely think about this happening to her best friend, Jean. Jean and Pat had been best friends since they met in 2nd grade, and I wondered how Jean could have stabbed Pat in the back. It would be interesting to see what Pat does when she finds out about Jean and Andy. And I will take care of it. We decided that was enough for today and headed home. Did you have a feeling that something was wrong between Pat and Andy? Of course not, no. And believe me, Pat would definitely tell me if there was something. We have no secrets from each other. I almost choked when she said that, but I restrained myself and asked, "Do you want to go to the lake this weekend?" It would be great. The kids love it there. Okay, then make a plan. When I got to the office in the morning, Kathy came over and said that Alan had called and that he wanted me to call him back as soon as possible. Last night we received a bonus, Alan said when I called him. There was a mobile phone charging on the kitchen table, and since I know you never leave yours, I assumed it was Jean's phone. I installed a bug in it, so now her cell phone, your home phones, and her car are tapped. I need to show you where the hidden camera switch is in the master bedroom so you can have some privacy when you're there. Have you checked them? Certainly. They are wireless and activated by motion and sound. They send signals to the remote control, which in turn sends them to the computers in my office. If something happens in your home, it will be under control. Thank you, Alan. No problem, buddy. Glad I could help. Unless something amazing happens, why don't we plan to have lunch every Friday so you can fill me in? I understand. Let's talk later. Bye. The rest of the week flew by, and I did a great job of being a loving husband. On Friday, I met Alan for lunch. Nothing unusual, buddy, he said, handing me an envelope containing the evidence collected so far. Right now, as we speak, she's in your bedroom with that. From what we have gathered, it appears that this has been going on for many years. I have no idea exactly how long, but obviously, it happened a long time ago. Perhaps something on the discs will trigger something that will give you an idea of how long this has been going on. On the other hand, they did not plot your death, although they were planning a divorce for both of them. There haven't been any details yet, but it looks like they're expecting some financial results. They won't get anything from me. I have a solid prenuptial agreement that covers the most important issues. I don't know, buddy. Perhaps this will become clear in the next couple of weeks. They are confident that they are covering their tracks and that neither you nor his wife suspects anything. Have you decided what you are going to do? Not yet. I need a hell of a lot of information before I make a decision. I want you to keep collecting it, but could you somehow set it up so that I can access the information without waiting for Friday lunches? No problem. I can give you surveillance footage of the house, but not information about bugs in your phone and car. Do you want it at home or in the office? In the office. I don't want to risk her finding something that makes her think I know what she's doing. Alan pushed a small box towards me. These are bugs that you can put in her purses. If she's like most women, she has one or two favorites that she always uses. I returned to the office, and since I had a clear schedule, I went down to the conference room, picked up the cart with audiovisual equipment, and took it to my office. The cart was equipped with a large screen TV and the necessary equipment to play cassettes, CDs, and DVDs. I told Kathy I didn't want to be disturbed unless it was a disaster and then settled back to look at the CDs Alan had given me. There was nothing interesting in the phone records. It was mostly about negotiating meeting times and exchanging "I miss you" and "I can't wait to see you again." The video was boring, to be honest. I've seen better. The weekend passed without intimacy as Jean, the kids, and I slept in a tent by the lake. On Monday, I was too busy to check the CCTV footage from home, and on Tuesday, I took a short day trip which prevented me from checking in on how Jean was doing. On Wednesday, I checked the channel from time to time but did not catch anything. It had to be a success because Andy was a real estate salesman and could leave his office to visit Jean whenever he pleased, and I couldn't sit glued to the computer all day. On Thursday, I managed to catch them finishing getting dressed, but I would have to wait until lunch with Alan on Friday to find out what they were talking about. When I had lunch with Alan, he told me that the week had been rather boring. They met on Tuesday, as I expected, and of course, it happened the day before. How long are you going to continue? You already have enough information to kick her out. That's probably true, but I'm hoping to get some information that will give me an idea of when and why they started. I'm curious to know what they're looking for financially before they go through with the divorce. Let's wait a couple more weeks, and if we don't have anything by then, I'll end it. Jean wanted to make love that night, and I began to notice a pattern. She wanted to make love on the night she spent the day with Andy. On Saturday, she told me she was going to go shopping for clothes and asked if I would mind babysitting. I didn't mind, of course, and we had a fun day together. Jean got home around 7 with a bunch of bags and packages, so I guess she did do some shopping. But she wanted to make love that night, which showed that she wasn't spending all her time in the shops. Since I found out about her and Andy, I haven't made any attempts to have intimacy with Jean. I just followed her lead. I wondered if she would notice sooner or later, and if so, if it would make her think. I decided that every now and then I needed to be the first one to do something. So on Sunday evening, I took the first steps and said, "Not today, dear. I've had a bad day and I just want to go soak in the bath." This was the first time I've ever refused her. That night, I did something I'd been putting off for a long time because frankly, I wasn't sure I really wanted to know. After Jean and the kids fell asleep, I got out of bed and went to the kids' rooms. I carefully opened their mouths and ran the swab along the inside of their cheeks. The next day, I took them to the lab to run a DNA test and told them I would pay extra for expedited results. That night, Jean wanted to make love, so I assumed she had been with Andy the previous day. This was confirmed the next morning when Alan called me. "We have something. They met yesterday and I think you need to watch this before Friday. I'll mail this to you." At 10:15, I had the CD in hand and headed to the conference room to use the audiovisual equipment. The conversation while they were dressing turned out to be instructive. How long will it be before we can get a divorce? Asked Jean. Nothing has changed since the last time you asked. Pat won't have access to her trust fund until she turns 35, which is still 2 years away. Do you have any news? Is Frank's father close to handing over the company to Frank? This is unlikely. The old fart is as healthy as a bull. Well, since you can't get anything out of Frank, we'll have to wait until Pat turns 35. Why don't we just screw it all and get it over with? I will take the children in the divorce, and I am sure that the court will keep the house for me until they turn 18. I will receive a decent amount of alimony and half of our property, which is a lot. I'm not going to give up the chance to get half of Pat's $5 million. There are only 2 years left. 19 months, actually, and we've already waited 6 years, so let's wait a little longer. We were lucky, and I'm just afraid that luck won't smile on us. I want to end this on my terms, not Frank's. So cross your fingers and hope Frank's dad dies or retires in the next couple of months. The prenuptial agreement does not allow you to take any share of the company, but once Frank gains control of the company, his net worth will increase, and your half of the assets could double. I still think we need to do this now. You worry too much, my love. We'll be fine. I turned off the disc and then heard, "You poor guy." I turned around and saw Katie standing there. Sorry, boss. I didn't mean to intrude, but the door was unlocked and I needed to remind you of your afternoon meeting with Yêur from Apex Products. How long have you been standing there? Almost from the very beginning. You were so engrossed in watching that you probably didn't hear me come in. When I saw you watching, I should have quietly left, but I couldn't tear myself away. How long ago did you find out? Much longer than I wanted. This will stay between us, right? You know me, boss. You know I've got your back. What are you going to do? I'm not sure yet. I need a little more information before I make a decision. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. Fine, thank you, Katie. As I removed the disc, a plan began to form in my head. There were problems with this, but if they could be solved, it might work. The next week passed, and on Thursday, I stopped by the lab to see if they had the DNA results. They did. According to the tests, the children were mine. This changed the plan I had been working on, and this information gave me the push I needed to do something about it. I was going to attack through the back door. If I could do it, I would sink them, and they wouldn't even know I did it. The hardest part was sitting next to Pat and not letting Andy and Jean find out. The only way I could do this was to catch Pat alone. Luckily, I had a way to do this. Pat was a middle manager at a company we worked with, and I would visit them occasionally. When this happened, I would go into Pat's office and offer to take her to lunch. I really didn't want to do this to her, but she needed to know what kind of idiot she was married to, and she needed to know about his plan to screw her over. I arrived at Milford Manufacturing at 11:15, spoke with Marv, the purchasing agent, and then stopped by to see Pat. Do you have time for lunch? With you, anytime. We got into my car and drove away. When she saw me heading away from the restaurants, she asked where we were going, and I told her it was a surprise. She looked at me with confusion as we pulled into my assigned parking spot at work. I told her that everything would clear up in just a few minutes. I led her into the conference room after warning Katie not to disturb us in any way. I locked the door and said, "I hate to be the one to do this to you, and you may never want to talk to me again, but it needs to be done." Why should I stop wanting to talk to you? Previously, messengers who brought bad news were killed. Bad news? The worst. The absolute worst. I inserted the CD into the AV device and pressed play. The screen lit up, and Pat saw Andy cheating with her best friend. She stood stunned and then said, "This is some kind of joke, right?" I shook my head. I removed the disc and inserted another one. I've had this garbage accumulating for 3 weeks, and I probably wouldn't tell you about it until I decided what I was going to do. But it happened yesterday, and I felt like you needed to know so you could decide what to do. I turned off the CD I was playing and inserted the one Alan had sent me. She looked at it and then said, "That pathetic son of a. That vile, two-faced, blood-sucking idiot. And this. I would die for her." Then she couldn't stand it and started crying. I hugged her and tried to console her, although I knew it was impossible. I had just destroyed her world, and I knew exactly how she felt. It sucks, honey, and I know it. But now the question is, what do we do about it? What are you going to do? I was thinking about doing nothing and just letting things run their course until the kids were 18. If I divorce this cheater, she'll get the kids, and I'll be a part-time dad while your husband lives with them and has a big influence on them growing up. Once I found out about their plans for you, I had to rethink everything. I should have told you while you still had time to do something about it. What do you mean? You have almost 2 years before you get the money. I don't know what's on your mind. Maybe you love that worthless idiot and want to fight for him. But if I show you this CD, you'll have plenty of time to divorce him before you get your money. So, like I said, you have time to do something about it. If I divorce him, it will involve Jean, and you will no longer be able to pretend that you don't understand what's going on. For you, this means divorce, and you will lose your children. Maybe, but on the other hand, perhaps not. What does it mean? If you don't use the materials I've already collected, Jean won't know what I know. We can put a private investigator on Andy and use what he finds out. I know that Jean leaves home on weekends to go shopping and that she is dating Andy. The next time they do this, they'll be followed by a detective, and we can use his material to get Andy. You can spit in Jean's eyes and then tell her you're not going to tell me because you don't want to hurt me or the kids. That way, I could sit on my material until I was ready to burn it. Of course, this may not work. She can simply say to hell with Frank. I still want to get rid of it. I just do not know. This is a shitty plan. She can come running to me and confess and beg me to forgive her, tell a bunch of lies about how she never really wanted this, and so on. If she did, I would probably pretend to forgive her, at least until the kids were old enough to leave home. I just do not know. It's impossible to predict what will happen. I don't know how much longer I would have been thinking about this if I hadn't heard what Andy was going to do to you. How did you even know about them? I told her about the overheard phone conversation and what I did after hearing it. She shook her head in disgust and said, I wish I knew how long this went on. I have one recording that says 6 years have passed. I just want to know how long this two-faced pretended to be my best friend while actually stabbing me in the back. She looked at her watch and said it was time for her to get back to work. On the way back, she told me that she was going to work with a private investigator and that she would contact me. I told her that if I had any additional information, I would make sure it reached her. For the next 3 weeks, everything remained the same. At the end of that period, I received a call from Pat. I have everything I need to go after Andy. You were right, they did meet on weekends, and although my detective didn't photograph them in the motel bedroom, he did have photographs of them holding hands, hugging, and kissing, and going in and out of motel rooms together. He did, however, take some good pictures from your living room windows. I'm going to see a lawyer this afternoon and hopefully get him indicted in a couple of days. I'll call you and let you know when. Once that happens, you should have a pretty interesting event. This conversation prompted me to take the next step. That night at dinner, I told Jean that we needed to start taking control of our finances due to the poor economic situation. The company has to take some steps to ensure its survival. My salary has been cut by just over a third, so we will have to start saving and watch what we spend. We will have to cut some expenses. I talked to the bank this morning about charging the house extra to help us get through this. I don't know how long this pay cut will last, and there may be more cuts before it ends. That night, for the first time since I knew about Andy, Jean did not want to make love, although she had spent 3 hours with Andy that day. 2 days passed, and Pat called me. Today is D-Day, my friend. I called Andy and made an appointment to discuss the sale of her house, so he would be there at 3 o'clock when he was served. Also, at 3 o'clock, I will stop by your house to pay a surprise visit to this cheater. I'm going to make her an offer she's smart enough not to refuse. If she agrees, you might be able to hold out for a while. I called Alan and told him what was going on. I told him I'd be in the office late and wanted him to email me anything he could catch on the phone after 3 o'clock. It was Thursday, and I could have waited until our lunch on Friday, but I didn't want to wait. I could have watched Pat's visit live, but I wanted to listen to the phone conversations that would take place after Andy was served. At 3 o'clock, I watched on my computer monitor as Jean was busy cleaning the house. The doorbell rang, and she walked to the door, opened it, and smiled when she saw Pat. The smile disappeared when Pat slapped her. Pat came into the house and shouted, "You worthless, two-faced, backstabbing. How could you pretend to be my best friend while sleeping with my husband and not even try to deny it? I had a private investigator follow Andy for 2 weeks, and I have footage of both of your Saturday visits to the motel, as well as 6 of his visits here. You really should close the curtains or blinds if you're going to be cheating in your living room. This would prevent my detective from taking pictures. It goes without saying that you are dead to me, and when I leave here, I never want to hear your voice or see your face. By all rights, I should have left you alone, but obviously, I care more about your husband and children than you do. So I'm going to give you one chance to not ruin your husband and children's lives. When you talk to that worthless piece of crap I'm married to, you better convince him not to contest the divorce. If you don't convince him and he resists, I'll make sure Frank gets copies of everything I have." She stood there staring at Jean for a few seconds and then said, "I still can't believe you did this to me." Then she turned and walked out. Jean rushed to the window and saw Pat getting into her car and pulling out of the driveway. I saw the anguish on her face as it dawned on her that she had just lost her best friend. I couldn't help but wonder at her thoughts. Of course, she couldn't help but know that she would lose Pat as her best friend when she dated Andy. If she was upset about losing her friendship with Pat, why did she start sleeping with Andy in the first place? I turned off the live feed and went back to work. If I had kept watching, all I would have heard were her lines of the telephone conversation she might have been having. I just waited until I heard both sides. I didn't have to wait long. At 4:40, Alan called and said that he had something interesting and would send it right away. 20 minutes later, I was listening to Jean and her lover. "Hello, it's me. We have a problem." "I know. You know Pat was here half an hour ago. She knows about us." "I know. I was just served with divorce papers and a restraining order. I think you need to prepare for your meeting with Frank because I'm sure she'll bring him up to speed." "Maybe not. After she hit me, she said she wouldn't tell Frank if I could convince you not to contest the divorce." "How could I challenge him? I'm indifferent to her, and there are photographs and everything." "I don't know. All I know is that she told me that if I talked you into not resisting, she wouldn't tell Frank anything." I'm not going to fight, especially when I know I can't win, so it looks like you're safe if Pat was telling you the truth. Why would she lie? A woman who was despised and all that? Maybe to lull you into a false sense of security so you'll be shocked when Frank tells you. Either way, this changes everything. How? We don't have to wait for her to get her trust fund. What we need to do now is focus on getting as much out of Frank as possible. It may not be so simple. According to Frank, we're having financial problems right now. The economy is so bad that the company has cut Frank's salary by a third, and he is negotiating with the bank to refinance the house to keep things going. What are we going to do? I don't know. I was counting on what I could get from Pat and what you could get from Frank to make the relationship work. I don't have a backup plan. I can hardly support myself with what I earn at the agency. The economic downturn has severely disrupted the real estate market. I think you'll have to stay with Frank until the economy improves or until I figure something out. I'll call you later. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked. I don't know. Now that I don't have Pat's income to supplement my own, I'll have to work much harder trying to find listings for houses for sale. I won't be able to relax during the day as much as I used to. We'll figure something out. Just give me some time to sort this out. I smiled when I turned off the disc. It was time for the next step. One of the things I learned from Alan was that in his business, he met and became friends with some rather dubious characters. By questionable, I meant that some of their actions were illegal, and some of them were willing to do almost anything if they had the right money. I called Alan and told him what I wanted, and he told me it was doable and that he would call me back. 2 hours later, he called back, giving me a name and phone number. 3 hours later, in the back room of a bar on the east side of town, a deal was struck and I was $2,000 poorer. I called Pat's cell phone, alerted her, and headed home. When I returned home, knowing that Jean had not seen Andy that day, I insisted on intimacy and got what I usually got on days when she was not with her lover. Not today, Frank. I had a really bad day. You know, Jean, lately I've been getting pretty tired of hearing that from you every time I want to make love. I'll tell you what, keep it to yourself. I don't care. I grabbed a pillow from the bed and went to my home office to sleep on the leather sofa. The next night, I would have returned to the bedroom, but sleep with him, with Jean, was over. She would have to beg me before I would do it again, but I wasn't going to refuse. No. I wasn't going to refuse. The next morning, on my way to work, I stopped and bought one of those alternative newspapers. You know, the ones that have a lot of advertising for adult theaters, adult bookstores, and the like. I was going to make a list of services, check out a few of them, and see if I couldn't come up with something with one of them. I was making a list when the phone rang. It was my dad, and he asked me to come up to his office. I went up to the 4th floor and entered his large corner office. His secretary motioned for me to enter. I was surprised to find my mother in the office with him. Are you ready to try your hand at managing a company? Why do you ask? Your mom and I have decided to go on a 3-week cruise, and depending on how things go, it could last 5 or 6 weeks, or maybe longer. When I took a week's leave, you were left in charge, but it was more like a caretaker's role than a management role. This time, you will do everything yourself, make all decisions, put out all fires. Can you handle it? When do I start? We're leaving for Florida on Friday night, so when I leave the building on Friday, everything will be in your hands. Fine. While you're both here, I need to fill you in on a few things. I told them all about my situation with Jean and how I had lied to her about taking a pay cut and might even have to increase the lies. Whenever she is around either of you, I need you to support me about how much the economy is hurting the company. But the company is doing well, my dad said. I know, but I'm trying to make her think that after the divorce she won't get much. Divorce will cost me my children, and I don't want that. I will try to keep us together until the kids are old enough to choose which parent they want to stay with or until they are old enough to live on their own. We will help as much as we can, said my dad. I can't believe Jean did this, my mother said. I always had a good opinion of her. Who do you want to see as the head of your department while you run the company? I think I'll give Katie a chance. Do you think this is reasonable? She didn't have much to do. Oh well, to hell with it, I said. You'll be in charge, so I'm not going to interfere. When I returned to my office, Katie followed me. She pointed to the middle of my table and asked, "What is this?" She pointed to the newspaper page and to my list lying next to it. She doesn't sleep with you, and you're looking for a replacement? That's half true. It's me who doesn't sleep with her, not the other way around. Why are you looking for a professional to take her place? I have needs, and I'm not the type to hang around bars looking for a girl for one night. The solution to your problem is much closer. Wow, and what could it be? Do you see yourself as the next Mrs. Englewood? No, at least not for now. I think we'd be a damn good match, but outside of work and our interactions here, I don't know anything about you, and you don't know anything about me. Based on what just happened, I'd say we're compatible, but there's more to a relationship than just good night. I'm interested to know if there's something more between us. Well, don't flatter yourself. It may take me a while to get rid of the first Mrs. Englewood, 10 years, actually. Now I'm thinking about staying married to her until my children grow up. I don't want to lose them in a divorce. 10 years? We should have enough time to figure out if we are right for each other. When can we do this again? I don't think we want to make a habit of doing it here at work, and I'll have some things to sort out before we can do it somewhere else. Besides, you might be too busy, and we won't be able to meet again for a while. Why did it happen? She asked. Because this Friday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you will be in charge of this department, I continued to explain what was about to happen. Do you really think I can handle this? I wouldn't have given you a chance if I thought you couldn't handle it. If you do as well as I think you will, you'll get a full-time job when my dad finally decides to retire and I move up. Damn it, I never expected something like this to happen. Won't this piss off those who think they should have gotten the job? Perhaps, but so what? They may think they should have gotten the job based on seniority or something else, but the simple fact is that no one else in the department has what it takes to do the job. If you have problems, solve them, and I will support you. She was silent for a couple of moments and then said, "You have never been to my apartment. Would you like to come and see my prints? Do you have engravings?" She just smiled, and I said, "How about I take a look at them tomorrow? Maybe we can leave work early so I can have more time to look at them." Agreed, boss. When I got home, Jean had already prepared dinner, and we barely spoke to each other at the table. The children mostly told us about their day at school. After dinner, I helped Marin with her homework and then spent some time in the basement workshop working with Jamie on the model aircraft carrier he was building. After the kids went to bed, I spent an hour in my home office going through the contracts I had brought home to study. When I arrived in the bedroom, Jean was already in bed. Pulling the blanket over myself, I turned my back to her. This must have attracted her attention because even on the nights when we weren't making love, I was always pressed against her. I knew she wouldn't initiate because Andy didn't come over that day. If everything went according to plan, it would be a long time before she tried to have intimacy, and as for me, I never, under any circumstances, intended to try anything. The next day, Katie and I left work an hour early and went to her house. She lied to me, she didn't have any engravings. I called Jean and told her I would be working late and asked her not to bother making dinner for me. When I got home, I played with the kids until it was time for them to go to bed, and then I watched TV for about an hour before going to bed. Everything repeated like last night. There were no hugs, and although I wasn't watching the live feed from home that day, it was obvious Andy wasn't there as Jean made no attempt to start anything. At 10 o'clock the next morning, Pat called me. "Thank you, Frank. It helped my heart." "Of course, I have no idea what you're talking about, but please call me. Maybe we can have dinner together sometime." "I wish I could. I will be in touch." Half an hour later, Alan called and simply said, "Everything is ready." I know. His wife just called me. The hospital must have called her. I would like to ask, but I think I'll wait until I find out about it through the usual channels. I don't want to show that I know too much. This may take weeks. It looks like he was attacked and decided to resist. Bad move on his part. Oh my God, what a misfortune. Yes, exactly. When I got home that night at dinner, I said, "I talked to Pat today." Jean's face turned slightly pale, and I continued, "I stopped in Milford to talk to the purchasing agent, and while I was there, I took Pat out to lunch. I also asked her if she and Andy would like to come over for a barbecue on Sunday." "Why didn't you tell me she kicked him out?" She was silent for a while and then said, "I thought I said it. I must have been busy with something else and missed it." I cannot believe it. Why would Andy cheat on a woman like Pat? She is smart, witty, and looking. I'd be interested to know what he thought could have been better. Anyway, I invited her to visit and said that we would like to cheer her up, but she refused. Strange. She never, at least in my memory, refused our invitations. She must really be in pain if she's doing this. Did she tell you who the other woman was? No, she was too upset to talk about it. Well, sooner or later it will come up. After dinner, I played Monopoly with the kids until it was time for them to go to bed, and then did some reading before going to bed. I was in bed when Jean joined me. I rolled to the side and turned my back to her, muttering good night. This morning I told Jean that Eldridge from TPM would be in town for contract negotiations, and I would probably take him to dinner so she wouldn't have to wait up late for me. Eldridge, of course, was not there, so I invited Katie to dinner instead. Later, we ate dessert, lots of dessert, at her house. I returned home around 11 o'clock to find Jean waiting for me. We haven't made love in over a week, and I'm more than ready. "Come on, baby, make love to me," I said. Jean would have to beg, and while it wasn't really begging, it was close enough. I decided to have intimacy with her, but I had an ulterior motive. This morning at breakfast, I said, "Pat got to the husband of the woman Andy cheated with." Jean's face tensed, and I continued, "Hubby must not have had a very good sense of humor. He sent Andy to the hospital." I saw the concern on Jean's face and continued, "I heard that he is in intensive care. I think he won't pursue other married women. Did you talk to Pat yesterday? Did she tell you who this woman is?" "She didn't tell me." "Come on, Jean, she tells you everything, and you tell her everything." I got up from the table and headed to work. It was Friday, and I met Alan for lunch. He gave me a single CD. There's almost nothing on it. A dozen phone calls from home and from her cell phone to this idiot. She wanted to know when he would come, but he continued to dissuade her. For the last 2 days, she couldn't reach him at all, and of course, we know why. She called the real estate agency half a dozen times, but all they told her was that he was out of the office. She tried to call him on his mobile, but of course, he didn't answer. Now she knows why. At breakfast, I told her that I had heard that he was in the hospital and badly injured. I told her that Pat must have gotten to the husband of the woman she was with. Andy and the woman's husband went to get Andy. I think in principle this is true. He grinned and said, her husband was behind this. We both laughed, and Alan asked, what now? It depends on Jean. I'm not going to tell her what I know. I'll stay with her until the kids are 18, and then I'll kick her out. Of course, she may have other ideas. She was so unhappy with me that she got together with Andy just to get it over with. If this continues, I will threaten that everyone in the world will see the audio and video recordings we have collected if she does not agree to my terms of divorce. I have no idea how things will turn out. All we have to do is wait and see. All I can do is wish you luck, mate. Should I pick up the equipment? No, leave it there. I still want to know what she does. Just let me know if anything interesting comes up. We can wait until our Friday lunch. I spent the day with my father, who told me some of the things I needed to know when I took office. At 5 o'clock, he got up and said, "It's all yours, Frank. I'll see you when your mom decides she's had enough, and just to warn you, that may never happen." He left, and I called my old office and asked for Kathy. Kathy had gone home at 5 o'clock, so Katie's arrival would not have caused any gossip. Although there shouldn't have been any, after all, I was in charge, and Katie was the head of one of my departments. It would be quite reasonable for me to call my subordinates to my office. Katie came in and asked, "Did you call, boss?" Yes, I called. There was something missing in this room, and I thought that maybe a woman's opinion would tell me what was wrong. I already think I know, but I need another opinion, a woman's opinion. She looked around and then said, "The color of the walls should be brighter, and that's all." Is this the best you can come up with? When I got home, Jean seemed out of sorts, and I assumed it was because her lover had been hospitalized and was in pretty bad shape. She must have been thinking, if Pat could do this to Andy, what is she going to do to me? She said she wouldn't tell Frank, but she never said she wouldn't get back at me. I pretended not to notice anything. After dinner, I played with the kids, and we agreed to go to the amusement park the next day. Jean was in bed when I went upstairs, and when I lay down next to her, neither of us made any attempt to cuddle together. The next day, Jean refused to go to the amusement park with us, citing poor health. The kids and I had a great time at the park, and when we got home, Jean wasn't there. She returned about an hour later with a couple of pizzas she bought along the way. I just didn't feel like cooking tonight. I don't feel well, so I'll go to bed. The next 5 days flew by, and Jean and I essentially just lived in the same house. Neither of us made any attempt to speak to each other, except for phrases like, "What would you like for dinner?" And "Don't forget to take out the trash." On Friday, while I was having lunch with Alan, he slid a single CD across the table toward me. Nothing special. She visited him in the hospital on Saturday. I don't have the video, but the audio from the bug in her purse shows that she was crying when she left. They mostly talked about how they didn't realize how bitter Andy's wife would be and wondered where she found the guys to do everything. The least good news, I think you'll find, is that he told her that unless she divorces you and gets a large sum of money, they won't be able to carry out their plans. Andy doesn't seem to have his own health insurance. He was covered under his wife's policy, and she removed him when she filed for divorce. He is now forced to pay his medical bills, which are significant and growing every day. There is some video of her sitting at home and crying, but other than that, there is nothing else. Then I guess they're out of luck because she won't get any big money from me. In fact, tonight I'm going to tell her that the family budget will have to be cut by a third or she can give up her car. It will be her choice, but it has to be one or the other. I had already told her that my salary had been cut by a third due to the bad economic situation and that there might be more cuts to come. How long are you going to keep doing this? It depends on Jean. She can leave whenever she wants, and there is nothing I can do about it. The no-fault divorce laws in this state don't give me any leeway, but unless Jean jumps ship, I intend to hold out until the kids are old enough to live on their own or old enough to choose which parent they want to live with. If a divorce does happen, well, I've said it before and I'll say it again, good luck, buddy. When I got home, I asked Jean if she had spoken to Pat, and she said no. Isn't it strange? I don't remember a day when you two didn't talk. She must be very upset about what Andy did to her. I'll call her and see if I can bring her here so we can cheer her up. I don't think you should do this for now. I think she should be left alone, and don't forget that I know her much better than you do. Okay, if you say so. We have enough of our own problems now. We will have to cut the family budget by a third until things get better at work. I don't see how to do this. Well, I'll leave it up to you, but you can either cut down on family expenses or give up your car payments. License plates and insurance account for about a third of the family budget. It's up to you to decide what you want to do. It's unfair. I need my car. The cut-off budget means we get a third less money than before, and we have to put up with it. I don't understand. Damn it, Jean, this needs to be done. Get used to the fact that we will no longer live in grand style. Just do it. Stop arguing about it and pray things don't get worse. There's still a chance that the company could close, and then we'd be in deep trouble. I left her sitting and went down to the basement to do something. An hour later, I came back upstairs and asked what we were having for dinner. I was hoping we could go somewhere tonight. Lord Jesus, woman, have you completely lost your mind? I just finished telling you that we have financial problems and need to cut our budget. Remember these words, Jean, budget, budget, budget. She ran out of the room in tears, and I smiled as I started preparing dinner. When everything was ready, I called the kids back from their game, and over the meal, we talked about their day at school. They asked where their mom was, and I told them that mom wasn't feeling well. Did something happen to her? Is that why she's relaxing in the bedroom? After dinner, I played with them until they went to bed, and then headed to the bedroom. Jean was awake when I entered the room. She looked at me and said, "You didn't have to talk to me like that." Yes, I did. The let's go out to dinner nonsense showed that you don't take seriously what I said about having less money and needing to adjust accordingly. This brings us back to the family budget or your car. Make your choice by Sunday evening and let me know, or I'll make the choice on Monday. I slid under the covers, turned my back to her, and fell asleep with a smile on my face. I had no doubt that she would choose the budget over the car, but I hoped she wouldn't tell me anything by Sunday evening, and on Monday, I would get rid of her car. She was silent at breakfast, so the conversation at the table was between me and the children. I asked them what they wanted to do that day, and when they didn't say anything, I suggested, "How about we go to the park?" Jean, thinking that by park I meant an amusement park, spoke up and said, "I thought we had to limit the budget." This gives me the opportunity to tease her again. The park is free, Jean. You don't have to pay to use the swings, slide, or gym. I spent half the day at the park with the kids, then we went home, and I did some yard work before dinner. Dinner passed in silence. The children were exhausted, and Jean seemed to have nothing to say. After dinner, I watched some TV until I felt ready to go to bed. Jean was already there and asleep, or pretending to be, which suited me just fine. On Sunday morning, I said I needed to go into the office and review the books to see if there was any way we could cut our expenses and stay competitive. An hour later, I was in Katie's arms. That evening, Jean gave me the answer I expected. She was going to keep her car and work on cutting her budget. She was cold towards me, and I guessed that she was unhappy with being called brainless, which was fine with me. On Monday morning, I went to the bank and opened a new account in my name only. At work, we were paid by direct deposit, so I transferred the check deposit from our joint account to my new account and then arranged for 2/3 of my check deposit to be automatically transferred to Jean and my joint account. That day, Kathy and I had a meeting at the Hilton Hotel with representatives from MAP Manufacturing, and after the meeting, we went upstairs and spent a pleasant hour before returning to work. Shortly before the end of the workday, Alan called me. "I have something you need to hear right now. Can you stop by to see me on your way home?" "I'm on my way. See you at 10 o'clock. When I got to his office, he invited me in and asked me to sit down. All I have is the data from her purse. She visited him on Saturday and yesterday, but their conversations mostly consisted of him insisting on getting the money and her telling him that she couldn't do it because of your salary cut and the fact that you were limiting her budget. Today, she met with him again, and the conversation moved to a different plane. "You won't believe it," Alan continued. He pressed a few buttons on his desk, and from the speakers on the cabinet behind him, I heard them discussing a plan to get rid of me forever and get money in the process. Alan turned it off and said, "I'll give you a copy so you can listen to the whole conversation later, but I felt you needed to hear this part right away." I sat silently for a while and then said, "This changes everything. The Russians had what the KGB called wet work, and right now, I'd really like to meet someone who could do that kind of stuff." Alan looked at me for a few seconds, then took a pen, wrote something on a notepad, and slid it across the table toward me. I read it and looked at him in surprise. The notepad said 20,000 each. I reached out, took a pen, crossed out each, and wrote Andy. Then I gave him the notebook back and said, "Go ahead." He smiled and said, "Consider it done." That evening, when I returned home, I found it difficult to behave normally around Jean. At dinner, the children and I mostly discussed our day. After dinner, I helped them with their homework and then we watched their favorite DVD, The Lion King. When it was all over, it was time for them to go to bed. I turned on my side, my back to her, and closed my eyes. About 5 minutes later, she got out of bed, and after a couple of minutes, she returned, got under the covers, and we fell asleep. I didn't sleep well and got up early. I dressed and left before Jean woke up. I had breakfast at the diner and then headed to the office. Around 10 o'clock, I called Pat and asked her to meet me for lunch over taco salad. I told her I was going to tell Jean what I knew about her and Andy. "I know you don't care about her anymore, but I thought I should let you know." "You're right, I don't care. But how about you try to keep your kids?" "I think I can keep them. Jean likes her lifestyle too much to give it up, especially since Andy is unlikely to be able to do anything for her. She can stay and be a mommy, but for this, she will have to sleep in different bedrooms and pretend to be a faithful and loving wife in public. I think she'll agree to this. I have a club that I can use against her if she doesn't." "Wow, what is this?" "I have all the videos and audio recordings of her and Andy. She's playing my game, or the world will see who she really is." "How's your divorce going?" "He's not resisting, so a decision should be made in about 3 months." I wished her well and went back to work. I called Jean and told her I would be working late and asked her not to make dinner for me. I took Katie out to dinner, and we ended up going to her place for dessert. I returned home at midnight, and Jean was already asleep in bed. Once again, I got up and left the house before Jean woke up. When I got home that evening, Jean's eyes were red from crying, and I found out why the next morning when Alan called me. Just wanted to let you know that I heard that your wife's friend's husband died yesterday afternoon. I learned that someone, probably one of the nurses, had not removed the air from the needle when she changed one of the Roman 4 bottles. Some people are simply unlucky. You might want to tell your wife about this so she can call her friend and offer support. I will. Thanks for letting me know. When I got home that evening, Jean was in a very bad mood. I got home half an hour later than usual, and when I walked in, she said, "Wouldn't you die if you called me and told me you'd be late?" The tone of her voice was exactly what I needed to understand what I was about to do. Do not shout at me. You're already sick of me. I walked away from her to wash the dishes before dinner and left her standing there with a stunned look on her face. 10 minutes after I put the kids to bed, I asked her to meet me in the office. When I entered, she was sitting on a leather sofa, and I took a chair at the desk. First of all, I know why you and Pat aren't talking, and I know who Andy cheated on her with. I saw surprise and then anger cross her face, and I was sure that I had understood everything correctly. Pat didn't rat you out. She said she wouldn't tell me if you talked and out of fighting the divorce. She didn't tell me. That's what I told her. As I said that, I pressed play on the VCR, and Jean saw for the first time the material I had collected. I let her watch for a few minutes and then quickly moved on to the part about Pat's trust fund. It was when I saw this that I told Pat about you and Andy and showed her the footage. Why I sat with this and did nothing is none of your business. All that matters is that I decided to act. You have 3 options, and only 3. First option, you pack your things and leave, and I file for divorce. In this case, you get nothing, and I get custody of the children. Second option, you stay here and be a mother to the children and my housekeeper. You will move all your belongings into the guest bedroom. As far as friends and family are concerned, we will still appear as a loving couple, but there will be, I repeat, no intimacy contact between us. Third option, you can say F you, Frank, I'm taking the kids and I'll fight to get everything I can out of you. If you go this route, I'll hand over this little fragment to the police. I pressed play again, and she heard herself discussing my impending death by accident with her lover. It's called conspiracy to commit murder, and you could face up to 25 years in prison in this state. While you're locked up, I'll divorce you, get custody of the kids, and they'll be grown up and on their own before you see them again. It's your choice, and I want to hear your answer before I leave for work in the morning. One last thing, tomorrow, get your 5th point to the hospital and tell Andy that when he gets released, he better get out of town on the first plane, train, or bus because I'm coming for him. If you care about him as much as he seems, this may help you choose the first or second option, because in the third case, he will end up in a prison cell next to you. I can't. You can't do what? Tell him he died in the hospital? When? Yesterday late afternoon? This is damn bad. I was looking forward to bringing him back to the hospital when he was discharged. Do you know what upset me the most? It's not like you F-ed Andy, although that did make me angry. What really got to me was that when he suggested killing me, you didn't say, "We can't do that," or "I won't participate in anything like that." You just went along with it. Get out of here and move to the guest room. Don't forget that I want an answer by the time I leave for work in the morning. She got up and left, and I took the disc out of the player and put it in my briefcase, which I took upstairs to the bedroom. I moved the dresser aside to block the door so they wouldn't come to me in the middle of the night while I was sleeping, and then I went to bed and had a good night's sleep. In the morning, I found Jean sitting in the kitchen with red eyes. I poured myself a cup of coffee and asked, "Well, what is your answer?" You already know, and don't pretend you don't. I can't leave my children, and I don't want to go to jail. Fine. We'll discuss the details when I get home in the evening. Don't wait for dinner because I'll be working late. One thing needs to be remembered: it should be obvious to you that I'm watching you. At the first hint, no matter how slight, that you are planning to take the children and run away, I will bring the hammer down on you. Understood? Yes. I had a great day at work, and of course, staying late is a euphemism for hanging out at Katie's apartment. I got home around 9 o'clock and found Jean watching TV. I just looked at her and said, "To the kitchen." I walked into the office and put my briefcase on the table. When I arrived in the kitchen, Jean was sitting at the table. I sat down opposite her and said, "The rules are simple. You will remain the same mother you always were, you will keep the house in order as always, and you will behave normally when I worry about you, when the children are around, when we are in public, or with friends and family. You will play the role of an attentive and loving wife. The excuse for us sleeping in separate bedrooms will be that I snore so loudly you won't be able to sleep. As for your life, I leave it up to you, but you will never bring another man into this house. Whatever you do, try not to let it become public knowledge and cause me humiliation. This shouldn't be a problem for you, since you have enough practice. You managed to keep me and Pat in the dark for over 6 years. If you follow these rules, nothing will change for you. You will still have your credit cards, access to your checking account, and your car. The only change is that you will no longer have a loving husband, but that shouldn't matter because you didn't want him anyway. Have questions? Only one: how long until the children turn 18 or start living on their own? What then? Who knows? That's still 10 years away, and a lot can change by then. You can also choose the first option anytime you decide you want it. I'll even tone it down a little. I'll pay you $5,000 for every year you last, and if you last at least 5 years, I'll buy you a new car that you can drive away with. That was 7 years ago, and everything turned out well. To all observers, Jean is a devoted wife and mother. She had several boyfriends, but she kept them all a secret, and I doubt any of our friends and family know about it, except for my parents, of course. I told them all about her affair with Andy and my current relationship with her, but I never told them the story of how I talked her into agreeing to this arrangement. Her current boyfriend takes her seriously enough to assign a private investigator to me, but how seriously she takes him, I don't know, and I'm not going to ask. Dad announced that he was going to retire next year and hand over the management of the company to me. When that happens, I may make some changes. Maybe I'll leave Jean alone and just visit her. Another option I'm leaning towards is a house on 5 acres with a guest cottage next to a 4-car garage. I could buy it, quietly divorce Jean, and let her live in the guest cottage so she could be close to the kids. I think Katie might like this. She didn't say anything, but I know she would appreciate a more permanent relationship, and for that matter, so would I. Well, we'll see in a year.